Hello Art 1-2 and welcome to your nose demonstration. I just wanted to point out that in the Google Classroom, it has the self-portrait shading procedure. So it goes through like the steps to shade each feature. And so it does go through like add shadow and mid-tone areas first for the nose. All right, so in the Google Doc, we're looking for a value of the nostrils and comparing to skin tone on the cheek. And then of course there's a lip question that we'll get to in the next video. All right, so things I want to point out. So what I look for is there a side of the nose that's darker? And I also look for the value on top of the nose, the side of the nose, the bottom of the nose. So those are the three dimensions of your nose, and you need to pay attention to those ranges of value to make it look three-dimensional. So for this one, the fact that the top of the nose is usually lighter because it sticks out so it catches some light. What about the side of the nose? And I also look for how does it curve into the eye area and eyebrow, and value of the bottom of the nose. For this one, I look at how the side of her nose is slightly darker because her highlight is a little bit over. So value on the top of the nose, it's slightly darker at the bottom. And of course that side, we have core shadow along the side and cast shadow where it has an actual shape. All right, so for his nose, his values are a lot more subtle on the nose, but still, since his face is pointing away, we have slightly darker on this side, the light side, and then value at the bottom. Since his nose is lighter than his cheek on this side, so I do really compare what is lighter, is it the nostril or the cheek? And then over here, the nostril's still a little bit lighter. I also look for like this bottom edge, looking at shadow near the bottom before starting. Okay, so we're gonna do nose. All right, I'm gonna use the 2B pencil because his nose is lighter than the cheek, but if you have a lot of shadow on one side, you probably want to lay that in with 6B. So I'm looking at, okay, there's shadow underneath his glasses and it curves because his glasses are kind of curved. And then actually I have part of his nose that I did not add there. So we have a little bit of a core shadow there. Then I'm gonna give that a layer. Okay, then his core shadow on his nose is fairly light and it runs along the side and kind of curves down. So you look for the shape of the shadow, and remember now the core shadow is like the darkest part in that one location, and dark is relative. Like for him, it's not very dark, and I'm really noticing how it curves and comes down. And then it kind of separates out the nostril from the side of the nose over here, but like darker in that part. Okay, so then looking at this nostril, so the top of the nostril over here has a slightly darker kind of mid-tone. Kind of curved a little bit. The bottom edge of the nose on this side, so I'm gonna go along the edge. Fade that up a little bit. Okay, so then I'm gonna fade out my core shadow into a mid-tone. I'm gonna go a little bit darker on that. Fade out to the reflected light area on that side. All right, so not a lot of value because my blender has a lot of value already on it. But before I touch it to the nose, I'm gonna test it out in the border. Okay, so it's dirty, but not super dirty. So you can always clean it off on the newspaper or the border. All right, so with noses, I'm gonna blend a circular motion where the core shadow is. Okay, and also the shadow from his glasses. And I outlined the highlight right here on his nose, like that little highlight. So I'm trying to avoid that too when I'm blending. Okay, so then I'm gonna fade out from the core shadow, or the darkest part, fade into your midtones. Fade along the edge. Okay, then I'm gonna use just whatever's on the blender. So notice how I kept my shapes a little bit. And I'm gonna super gently blend over. And so if you have more values, you might have to like take a second look. And I'm trying not to press very hard because now we're gonna go back and erase out and pull back out some of the value. And refine the edges like over here. I need some refining. Okay, so with kneaded, actually there we go. Let's do some refining. So I'm gonna use regular wooden pencil. So I don't want it to get super dark, but I want to try to match the value of the cheek. And his nostril kind of comes in. I'm going to fade out into what I have. Okay, I'm just going to touch blend with my small blender to fade that out. Let's see. So I'm going to use some mechanical or 6B in here. I do have a lighter value underneath the nostril. It's like a piece of his skin kind of getting pulled. So I'm going to erase that part back out. I still feel like this shadow needs to be a little bit darker. So I don't want it to get very much darker, so I am going to just kind of, because this shadow fades down into this shadow. Okay, then I'm going to blend over that a little bit. So adding another layer in the darkest parts. And then I am going to do another nose where you can actually see the nostrils. His are just slits. So we'll talk about like, what if you can't really see the nostrils? Okay, with kneaded eraser, I'm gonna make it kind of pointy. I'm gonna pull back out where my highlights are. So I'm gonna draw back in my highlights, and this side of the nose on the left-hand side is lighter. So I'm gonna actually draw back in, and it comes all the way down to about like here. I'd say the whole side of the nostrils a little bit lighter. So I'm gonna like use gentle pressure, kind of like a blender with the kneaded eraser. Okay, and then in general, like this part's a little bit lighter. Kind of fades up into what I erased out. There. So I used it kind of like a blender. Then if you have a cleaner edge on the larger blender, you can use it, or you can use the end of the blender to kind of soften that up a little bit. Okay, double checking. So I feel like over here is too light. So I'm gonna use the graphite that's on my blender, or if it needs to be much darker, add another layer. So I'm kind of looking from a little further away. Okay, so I have to fix the skin underneath the nose for sure. I just want to get the top of the nose so I could compare. Okay, I'm gonna pull back out his highlights. And actually, with mechanical, I think, that shadow kind of comes along the edge of that nostril, comes up a little bit more, and then some value kind of fades into the curve. So while I'm here, I am going to refine the skin a little bit. Like I feel like that crease is pretty dark. go back over it. And it kind of wraps a little bit along that edge. So noses are all the subtleties that you have to kind of pay attention to in order to make it look like your nose. So let me fade that out a little bit. Okay, so now I'm also going to pay attention to the skin underneath his nose. So the skin between the lips and the nose. So he has a bit of a highlight on top of his lip. Often for males, you'll see that like lighter patch of skin between facial hair and lip. And I'll probably touch that up a little bit. And I feel like it's lighter over here. We'll touch it up a little bit when we shade the lips. Okay, it like kind of scoops up a little here. So if you can see that little dip, you're like above your Cupid's bow, you can add that in there. And I'm gonna, actually it is lighter over here. But I'm gonna gently, like hardly any pressure, blend that back out. Okay, I'm gonna kind of blend over what I have there. Okay, so refining. Okay, I'm gonna use mechanical pencil along that bottom edge, coming up into like a little bit. You can see like a little bit of the nostril over there. So I kind of scribbled a little bit. Small blender. Over here, I feel like it's just, it kind of comes up slightly. And it's not as dark. And so that's where his nostrils are, but that's all that we can see of them. And right underneath that is the lighter skin. He has highlight. But it doesn't extend as far over as what I have it. Actually, kind of comes up a little bit. Okay. All right, so that's his nose. So his nose is super subtle, and so I'm double checking, like, is it lighter? Is the nostril lighter than the side of the cheek? Like maybe a little bit more. Okay. Is the nostril lighter than the cheek over here? Like next to it? Yep. Okay. Check the skin between the mouth and your nose. And then if your nose is near your eyes and you don't have glasses like he does, you're just going to kind of fade around your eyes a little bit to fade it out. So I'll show you that in the next one. Okay. A front nose where you can actually see nostrils. All right, so her skin, I wanted to point out her skin looks a little rough. So I got a little bit too dark, and so I had to go back and erase that. And then I didn't have the highlight on her cheek coming up like to her temples where it needed to be. So I used the kneaded eraser, and I like literally like used it like a blender and drew back in the light parts. Then with a like a cleaner side of the bigger blender, I'm gonna go back with some larger kind of circles, but less pressure. So I'm not pressing very hard at all. I blended over the eyebrows. I'm gonna fade out her erased parts. So turn your drawing so your arm is comfortable. So I'm going right over kind of where the eyebrows are. Shed a little bit of a highlight above the brow, same with the cheek. Okay, and then I'm going to just kind of blend up into the nose area so there's not like a line between. I still feel like I need to do another round of blending on her. that's more subtle along this edge. So I did kind of fade like into the eye area, but the skin is not perfect. Okay, looking at her photograph, which is right here. I definitely want to cover that hand. I don't want to mess up the hand. Okay, so I'm looking at where is it darkest. So I have darker value over here. So I'm going to use a little bit of 6B. I'm looking at how it curves up into the eyebrow part. How it kind of curves in a little bit more from the eye there, and then flows down. Then in general, this side is a little bit darker. Okay, so then she has a definite cast shadow. So I'm going to go over that again, which I did put it on there when I was doing the skin, but I'm going to do another layer. And it kind of angles down a little more. Okay. All right, looking over here, so she has a less of a shadow. So I'm going to use lighter pressure. Kind of fade into the skin that I have on that side. Then I'm looking at her nostril on that side. It's hard to tell in this picture, but it's slightly darker. So I'm going to go slightly darker along the edge, but then I'm just going to fade it up into the skin. I feel like that needs to come in a little bit more, and I'm also fading it up into like the forehead. I'll just kind of blend that in with the blender. Okay, so she has highlight all along. She has some reflected light over here. So the bottom of her nose is actually a little bit darker. Okay, looking at the nostril, so she has a slight value that separates the top from the side a little bit. Not very obvious. Okay, then I'm looking below her nostrils. Like, what does the skin look like below? And this side is darker. She has like a shadow where the skin kind of comes up. Okay, so then in general, her highlight is a little smaller. So I'm going to kind of fade out a little bit, fade out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to start with medium blender, then blend. So I like to do kind of circular motion to kind of work it into the paper, but then go back and kind of blend in the direction or the curvature that it fades up into. And so I'm going to just kind of fade it up into the eyebrow, fade it into the eye area, because then we'll perfect it when we do the eyes. And do a bigger blender just to kind of fade it out into our forehead area. Okay, along this side. Then I'm going to kind of go along the curvature. I'm going to fade over into her eye part just a little bit, just so there's not a hard edge, and then we'll perfect that later. Okay, so now I feel like that's pretty small. I'm going to switch blenders to my small blender to get these edges. Just a darker shadow on the bottom of that nostril. I'm trying not to lose her nostril shape, but we can always add it back in. Okay, then with medium blender, I'm going to super gently blend over, and I'm going to really try to blend into the cheeks a little bit. So not pressing very hard. And then that skin around the eye will perfect when we do the eye. So just get it to kind of fade out. Okay, with mechanical pencil, I'm gonna go back in. Actually, yes, with mechanical pencil, I'm gonna redefine the edge of her nostril over here, and in that cast shadow, and I'm gonna try to get it smooth to where I don't have to touch it again. It's really dark, like right there, where the crease of her cheek is. So I'm looking for subtle, tiny little values. Okay, so now I am going to put her slit of her nostril in so I can double check the value like around it. And it doesn't go all the way to the side. And then the value from that slit kind of flows under. Under her nose. Okay, so then on this side, you want to try to get your nostrils to be similar. You can see a little bit more of that one kind of comes up a little bit. Okay, nostrils in there. The nostrils really kind of make it. I'm not going to blend over those, but I'm going to blend. Okay, so underneath, bottom of the nose. I feel like there's like that kind of comes up anyway. Shadow under, and she actually has like a shape to that shadow. It's actually the skin underneath the nostril. Shadow on the skin underneath the nostril opening, I guess, to be more specific. Bring that over. Like it's a little bit, that darkness comes over a little bit. Okay, so then over here, 6B, I feel like this part needs to curve in. Where does that line up with her eye? I wonder if that needs to come up. No, that looks high enough. Okay. Okay, this nostril is darker down here. Let me blend over this with my small blender. And we'll go back with the larger. Now it fades down, and I'll go back with the medium. Okay, so the bottom of this nostril is darker. And just that little bit of reflected light on the nostril over there. Okay, so we're about ready to erase. Let's just shadow underneath. Okay, hold on just a second. Little shadow underneath the tip of the nose. And not very dark though. Okay, then with the kneaded eraser, I'm going to pull back out. I'm going to kind of tap where her highlight is. And it's the highlight that also creates the form. So she's a little bit of a highlight that comes down, blends over. I feel like the whole nostril isn't all dark right there, so I'm going to pull out a little bit of value there. Shows a slight little speck of light on that side. Okay, now in the bridge, I'm going to erase back out. And I look at where does it fade. So it fades pretty close to the eyebrows. And then I'm gently fading along. Okay. Medium blender, but I want to check how dirty. Okay. Yeah, get some of that off. Okay. So over here, I feel like it blends a little. Just a little bit more highlight over here. Oh. And I look for a little reflected light. She has just a touch under there, and I feel like this part comes down. All right, then I'm going to kind of go along the edge, though. Just soften just a little bit, because that shape looks weird. So don't think of it as a nose. Think of it as just shapes of value. How do the values connect or not? Where do they fade? How far do they fade over? And that will perfect when we do that eye. Okay, so subtle values. And then I'm going to look at the skin around. So like over here. Curl on that edge slightly. And then it kind of fades down for her. Fades into what she has. Okay, the skin between the nose and lip. I'm going to kind of blot out. Okay, and then it extends from that nostril down. Okay, over. Then I'm going to gently blend over that to soften it. Okay, there you go. So again, don't think of it as a nose, just think of it as where do my values end, connect, what's the value of the nostril compared to the cheek, how does the value transition, and just kind of fade over into the eyes a little bit. We're gonna go back and perfect that skin right before we shade the eyes. All right, the next video is gonna be lips. So I'll probably do these lips first, and then I'll do his lips where there's less detail, but also teeth. I'll see you in the next video.